Hey, Alicia Novin here, and today I'm going to talk about 4 things that your hero developers will do. Here we go. Let me quickly start with who that hero dev is. The hero dev is somebody who really knows the code base incredibly well. And they don't just know the code base, but they also know how the code base works in the different environments and some of the different configurations and things that you should factor in so that when you're working against them, you avoid certain problems. They're the one person that everybody turns to whenever there's a problem, and they'll be the one who can quickly resolve it or otherwise will be persistent until they do resolve it. So because of that, I wanted to cover 4 key traits about the hero devs and how you can also work to becoming one of the hero devs yourself. So here we go with number 1. Hands down, the best coders I know are insanely good at using the debugger tool to problem solve and get to the root cause a lot quicker. You know, they're not taking that lazy, sloppy approach of just dumping everything to the console and then reading the output. That works, but it's a sloppy way and it's not very quick, and it's not elegant either. Instead, when you use the debugger, you can set breakpoints, but more importantly, you can set conditional breakpoints, and you can use the watch or the immediate windows to see values change and set them yourself so that you can find that problem a lot faster and you can work at resolving a lot sooner. So get to know the debugger. It's probably your best friend. Another thing that hero devs are incredibly good at doing is reading bad code. And I want to be careful here because I don't really like to objectively say that code is bad, but let's just assume that there is some code there that is really difficult to read and understand. It's very spaghetti-like, and it's just hard to immediately understand how it's going to get executed. It breaks all of the fundamental rules of writing clean, neat, maintainable code. And while it's easy to read your own code, and it's a little trickier to read code that you wrote a year ago, reading someone else's code, even when it's good, can be difficult. But when it's bad code that you had no part in writing, and maybe the people who wrote it are no longer around, being able to unwind and understand exactly what is happening is a skill unto itself. And it is one that takes time, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of mental energy to sit there and unpack everything that it's doing. And the best hero devs I've seen are incredibly good at doing this because they're able to unwind that code and make it look easy. And so doing that is one that I think is a trainable skill. It just requires patience. It requires you to think through that execution and what it's doing line for line. But especially when the architecture is more complicated and you have lots of different objects that are working together, it does become more challenging, but they're very good at diagramming out what's happening, making a mental model of how the code is interacting. And that's one that will always serve you well because very often we're working with code that we didn't write. So if you want to work with becoming a hero dev, definitely get good at reading other people's code. And thankfully the internet is full of tons and tons of code, and so that's a good way to challenge yourself, is just pick up some code in GitHub and see if you can understand it, see if you can unwind it without just relying on the documentation. Building off the last one, great hero devs are incredibly skilled at refactoring bad code and making it good. And there's a whole lot to unpack here in terms of the different techniques and approaches that you can take when you're doing so. There's a great book that I always talk about. It's called Working Effectively with Legacy Code, and it has a ton of different techniques that you can take. One of my favorite is this discussion around seams and looking for seams. And I won't get into all the techniques in there, but one of those things after you've been looking at bad code and been able to read it is you want to think through, how would I refactor this? And one bit that I'll just say is that sometimes it's not about just deleting it all and starting from scratch. Sometimes you want to rebuild that ship one plank at a time. And so using that technique, you can start to make better decisions about how to refactor. The first 3 things were all about how you can become a hero dev. And the last one is all about how you should not want to become the hero dev. And if you're a manager, you don't want to have a hero dev on your team. Whether you call them a hero or superhero or a rock star, those kinds of developers are problems. There's a great book called An Elegant Puzzle by Will Larson, and it talks about how you want to eliminate the hero dev from your team. Because the truth of the matter is, when you're under a time crunch and there's an escalated issue that has to get resolved and you're always turning to that same person, they will burn out. They will get frustrated by the rest of the team, wondering why that team is not pulling their own weight. They'll get a sense that they are maybe better than other people, and then you'll have to deal with egos. Ultimately, that's not a productive environment and it's not constructive. So you want to eliminate that hero dev. Really, when you're looking at someone who has those skill sets, you're finding someone who has a unique ability to use the tools, understand the code base, and get to a problem quickly. And what that person's focus should then be is disseminating that approach, that knowledge to all of the rest of the team members. So maybe there is a problem and maybe they are solving it. But if they can stand to have someone sitting beside them and they can walk them through their approach, great. If they want to actually work on their own, then have them at the end come back and work with the rest of the team and explain what they had to do, why their approach worked, and ultimately what the solution was. Because you never want to have that hero programmer solve that same kind of problem a second time. It should fall to other team members. And that way, that hero programmer, hero dev, is learning a very valuable skill, which is how to train and mentor and guide the rest of the team, which is really what I think the hero part should be about. It is not about retaining knowledge, but sharing it. So that was it. Those are the 4 things. A little bit of a switcheroo on that last one, because ultimately you don't want to have that hero on the team in the sense of being the one person to solve all problems. You want that skill set, but you want that skill set to get shared across everyone on the team. So if that is you, make sure you're doing the right thing by training and helping and supporting the rest of the team. Otherwise, you're at risk of getting burnt out. And really, if you're at that level of skill, the next thing for you to do is work on that skill of being able to work with other people and help them and train them upwards. I hope you found it helpful. Hope you found it useful. Leave me some comments. Tell me your thoughts. Also check out my podcast called Increments. It's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. It's also on YouTube. Hope we'll talk soon. Thanks.